Welcome to the WHMIS 2015 Global Harmonization System Awareness Informational Webinar. My name is Ryan Bast of the Motor Safety Association. You may have noticed that your microphone is muted, and it will remain muted throughout the duration of today's webinar. However, if you do have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat box, and at the end of the webinar, I will go through all of the questions and email back questions and answers to all attendees of today's webinar. Today's webinar is not a training session on WHMIS 2015. It's going to be education only through this webinar on changes to WHMIS and that transition period to help you prepare. And the information is based on the amended Hazardous Products Act and the final Hazardous Products Regulations. However, it is still up to the employer to provide workers with site-specific training for the hazardous products that they work with or their workers work with to ensure that they are following the safe handling procedures. And as you'll see in the coming slides, there's a multi-year transition period for WHMIS 2015, which we will take a closer look at in this webinar. So as we go through, to give you a bit of an agenda for today, I'll go through an introduction to WHMIS, and I'll speak to the Global Harmonization System, as well as some of the changes to WHMIS, as well as the responsibilities. We'll look at the new WHMIS 2015 Pictograms, as well as the supplier and workplace labels. We'll take some time to go through safety data sheets, as well as explain the difference between education and training requirements for WHMIS 2015. And we'll wrap this up with a review and a conclusion. So workers have the right to know about hazardous products used in the workplace. This is the reason why WHMIS was developed in 1988. And this came through a set of rules to classify hazards and label chemicals through a series of partnerships through the federal, provincial, and territorial laws to give us these WHMIS regulations. And workers are exposed to hazardous products every day in most workplaces, and they may be at risk for many serious health problems, such as kidney or lung damage, cancer, allergic reactions, or burns. And some of these hazardous products can even cause fires or explosions. Therefore, the importance of having an effective WHMIS system in place. You may have taken a WHMIS course in the past. That WHMIS course would have likely been known as WHMIS 1988 if you've taken it prior to the last few years. And now there's a newer system out called WHMIS 2015. And the goal of the WHMIS 2015 program is to align with the Global Harmonization System. So what exactly is the Global Harmonization System? Essentially, the goal of the GHS is to have the same set of rules for classifying hazards, and the same format and content for labels will be adopted and used around the world. So when these hazardous products are categorized through the GHS, a category 1 would be more dangerous than a category 4. So the lower the number, the more hazardous the product is. And this GHS system helps establish rules for preparing consistent labels for the hazardous products that are covered by the safety data sheets. You can see why this is important. When I look at a lethal dose test done per country, and what is considered toxic in Canada is considered non-toxic in India. Therefore, having the consistency in all countries adopting GHS so we all are on the same page. Some people asked, will GHS replace WHMIS? And the answer is no. The Global Harmonization System will not replace WHMIS. WHMIS will be modified to incorporate the GHS elements. And that new system is called WHMIS 2015. And the old system, which was always called WHMIS, is known as WHMIS 1988. You can see by this chart, when we take WHMIS 1988, we add the global harmonization system to it, we come up with our new system of WHMIS 2015. I'm going to talk about some of the changes from WHMIS 1988 to WHMIS 2015. They now use safety data sheets instead of material safety data sheets. So the M is gone and it's now known as safety data sheets. And the contents of these sheets have changed slightly. They're now in a 16-section format. They do use a standardized language, and the supplier labels will have a signal word, either danger or warning, on the supplier labels. And the hazardous products are divided into two major groups, either physical or health. And these are split up into further classes. So I'm going to go through each of those points and give a lot of more explanation to them in the upcoming slides through the remainder of today's webinar. But as we look at how does this WHMIS 2015 work, we have our suppliers and employers, and they are providing information, whether it be through safety data sheets, WHMIS labels, or education, or site-specific training provided by the employer, all gives us the informed worker. And that's what our goal is when we try to implement this WHMIS system as we are in the transition period currently. And I want you to take some time, as this is a very important slide I want to emphasize. The WHMIS system of 2015 first rolled out on February 11th of 2015 in phase 1 of the transition period. By today's date, we are in phase 2 from June 1st, 2017 to May 31st of 2018. And during the phase 2 period, suppliers, including manufacturers and distributors, need to solely be on the WHMIS 2015 system. The distributors can be using either WHMIS system right now, up until the end of May next year, as well as employers. But once we get to next year, the transition period changes again, and come December 1st, 2018, suppliers and employers all need to be educated and site-specifically trained and fully utilizing the WHMIS 2015 system. So let's look at some of the responsibilities. The suppliers need to ensure the appropriate classification of these hazardous products and that they are providing the appropriate labels so that we are receiving the products with the WHMIS 2015 labels from the suppliers, as well as the safety data sheets to their customers. As I mentioned, the material safety data sheets have changed and are now known as safety data sheets. So that's what the supplier's role is in this new process for WHMIS 2015. The employers, during this transition period from WHMIS 1988 to the implementation of the WHMIS 2015, workers are going to be exposed to both systems because of the transition period. And employers are required to train workers in both systems. So my assumption would be that most places, if not all, have already trained their workers in the WHMIS 1988 system. And the WHMIS 2015 system is currently in the transition period. So for example, if there are no products with the WHMIS 2015 or safety data sheets and labels in your workplace, you can continue to use the WHMIS 1988 requirements. However, once you receive a product that has a safety data sheet and a label complying with WHMIS 2015, the employer must comply with these new requirements. This includes the education and site-specific training. And I'll highlight some examples of the education and training further in this webinar, but I just wanted to emphasize people are going to be exposed to two systems during this transition period, and they need to be educated and trained on both systems during the transition period. And workers need to participate in these education and training programs, and take the necessary steps to protect themselves and be actively participating in identifying and eliminating hazards when we do look at WHMIS and the hazardous products that people work with in their facilities. Well, let's take a look at the WHMIS 2015 pictograms. So the pictograms in place are for 23 separate hazard classes, and these are represented by 10 pictograms. And when we look at these pictograms, they are slightly different than what we've seen in the WHMIS 1988 system. Basically, the pictograms are graphic images that immediately show you what type of hazardous products are present. And with a quick glance, you can see, for example, if the product is flammable or if it might be a health hazard. Most pictograms have the distinctive red diamond-shaped border, and inside this border is a symbol that represents the potential hazard, whether it be fire, health, corrosive. And some of these GHS pictograms are more easily understood, and it's anticipated it's going to improve hazardous communication, particularly for workers who are not literate in the language used on the label. So I'm going to take a look now at each of the 10 pictograms to give you a little bit more explanation around them. The first one, quite obviously identified by the pictogram with the bomb exploding within the red diamond-shaped border, is pertinent to explosive products. So when we see products that have this type of pictogram, we know that they are explosive. The next products listed with the pictogram are flammable, and this pictogram looks like a fire burning, and this is applicable to flammable gases, aerosols, liquids, and solids. So when we see products that have this flammable pictogram on it, we know in fact that it is flammable by this indication. And we don't want to confuse it with our oxidizers. From this pictogram, we do see a fire burning, but we also look closer and see the letter O, and that's for oxidizer, pertinent to oxidizing gases, liquids, and solids. And oxidizing materials can speed up the development of a fire and make it burn more intensely, cause combustible materials to burn spontaneously without the presence of an ignition source, such as a spark or flame. So be aware of the oxidizers and when you do see this pictogram. Compressed gases, gases under pressure, is, when we look at the pictogram, fairly self-explanatory. We do see this type of pictogram on perhaps welding, oxygen, acetylene type of compressed gas cylinders. Fire extinguishers even have this type of pictogram. So when we see this compressed gas pictogram, we know that there are gases or contents under pressure. The next type of pictogram are for corrosives. And these are corrosive to metal as well as eye damage or skin corrosion. And we see on the pictogram the chemical pouring onto the skin as well as pouring onto the metal and causing damages to the metal. And remember what I said earlier about the different categories. The category 1s are more dangerous than the category 4s. So keep in mind when we see the corrosive pictogram to take the necessary precautions. The next one is the acute toxicity, which is the skull and crossbones. And this is the immediate health hazard. These are the things that can quickly occur as an immediate health hazard. When we see the skull and crossbones, we should be reminded of that and again take the necessary precautions necessary. And then in addition to that pictogram, this is a new one that we have available to us, which is the health hazards. And the pictogram looks like a human chest with a hole in it. And these are the things that slowly hurt us every day and cause our health to deteriorate. And sometimes we may overlook these health hazards because they are chronic and it takes longer for them to hurt us, opposed to an immediate health hazard or an immediate safety hazard that's going to hurt us right on the spot. But nevertheless, these are very critical because these things eventually catch up to us, these type of health hazards, if the necessary precautions aren't taken. So again, just be aware that when you see that pictogram, to follow the necessary requirements. The next type of pictogram is the acute toxicity, which is harmful. And this pictogram looks like an exclamation mark. This is something that can happen quite quickly that is harmful. Perhaps if you were to get a chemical on your skin or in your eyes, this would cause some irritation or damages. So again, just watch for this type of pictogram because it is something that does happen quite quickly. A new pictogram to us in the WHMIS 2015 system is the environmental hazard. And these are hazardous to the aquatic environment. The pictogram looks like a fish swimming and with a tree in the background. And when we see items wearing this pictogram, we should be aware of the safe disposal and handling of this product. The last type of pictogram is the biohazardous infectious materials. And this is the only pictogram that's not in the red diamond. These are the health hazard disease-causing organisms. And we see these primarily perhaps around in the healthcare system, around bodily fluids that may be in containers that would have this type of pictogram or label. So that is a brief summary on the pictograms. But I do encourage you to further your education and site-specific training on these pictograms, as what I gave you is just a very preliminary taste of the 10 different pictograms to give you that example. So let's look at the supplier and workplace labels. It's always check to see if there is a label on the product before you use it, because how do you know what you're using if it is not labeled? And I see this a lot of times when I go into different dealerships, that there's products and spray bottles, and the people may assume or they may have a good indication what's in it, but a lot of people would not know what it is if it's not labeled correctly. And you need to read and understand and follow the instructions that do come on the labels and safety data sheets and any of the education and instruction training provided by your employer. And this is so critical when we look at supplier and workplace labels. I was aware of a facility where they decanted a product into an eye wash bottle, and they had that hazardous product in that eye wash bottle, and it wasn't labeled. And they just liked the way it squirted out of the nozzle, but that wasn't labeled, and someone could have picked that up and squirted in their eye and caused major damage. So that was a huge concern, and therefore the importance of the supplier and workplace labels. So let's talk about the supplier labels first. I have a slide here with the two different sample supplier labels. The one on the left is from WHMIS 1988, and the one on the right is from WHMIS 2015. In general, the WHMIS 2015 supplier label contains less information than the 1988 counterpart. And you can also see that the 1988 has used a hatched border around the supplier label. And from my understanding, a decision about using the hatched label for WHMIS 2015 supplier labels has not been finalized yet. So this is what the WHMIS 2015 supplier label will look like. And on the supplier label, there needs to be these 5 items. There needs to be a pictogram on the supplier label, a signal word, hazard statements, precautionary statements, and the supplier contact information. So when we do take a look at what a supplier label looks like for WHMIS 2015, you can see that we have our pictogram, we have our signal word, our hazard statement, and our precautionary statement, and contact information. So those are the items that need to be on a supplier label. So if you receive a product with the WHMIS 2015 system, that is a sample of what the supplier label should look like on the products that you receive. And then there's what's called the workplace label. So these are used, again, if you take a product and you decant it into a container such as a spray bottle, or sometimes you may get a product in a barrel and you put it in smaller jugs or containers, you need to put on a workplace label. The only exception to this rule is if you pour that product into the container and you immediately use it, or you're under the direct control and supervision of that product at all times, then you do not need to put on a workplace label. However, if you pour some of that product into a bottle and it's sitting on your workbench for days on end, that would be an example of when you need to have that workplace label in place. Another situation is if the supplier label, when the item came from your supplier, that label either peels off or becomes illegible, you could affix a workplace label to it. And what needs to be on these workplace labels are the product identifier, safe handling information, and a reference to the safety data sheet. And you can take this information and you can write it directly onto that spray bottle with a permanent marker. And there's been some challenges there I've observed. Some people have made their own workplace labels, and based on the bottles and how the contaminants we work with, they don't stick, and then the labels peel off. Or the marker becomes blurry, what we wrote down onto the container. So sometimes what people have done is they've actually made like a keychain tag. So they have a tag where they have the product identifier, safe handling information, and reference to the safety data sheet, and they've put that tag onto the hazardous product. Therefore, not having to worry about the label peeling off or the writing becoming blurry onto that bottle. So those are a couple of options as well to label an item with the workplace label. And what a workplace label looks like as a sample, it would have the product identifier, so the name of the chemical, safe handling information, and reference to the safety data sheet. So those are the three items required on a workplace label. However, you can also have pictograms and the signal word as well, but you do need to have these three items: the product identifier, safe handling information, and reference to the safety data sheet. But there's nothing wrong with having the pictograms as well as the signal word available. So let's talk now in section 6 about safety data sheets. And the suppliers that you receive these hazardous products from must be providing safety data sheets to the customers. And these need to be made readily available to workers using the hazardous products. This can be done through a paper version in a book. You can also have it on your computer. When it's on your computer, it needs to be readily available. So if your power goes out, you need to have either a battery backup system on your computer so people can access the safety data sheets, or ensure that people aren't working when the power is out if they're not available access to the safety data sheets. And something new that has changed from WHMIS 1988 to WHMIS 2015 is that we don't need to update the material safety data sheets every 3 years. So when it's changed to safety data sheets, we don't need to change and update those every 3 years. The only time we need to change these safety data sheets is when significant new information is available. So what you have to do is basically screen these hazardous products in your workplace and have a process in place to ensure that the safety data sheets are in place and people are educated and trained on the hazardous products, And if for some reason you may receive information from the supplier that a new safety data sheet has changed and the chemical is may now have different properties and significant changes are to that hazardous product, you would then utilize the new safety data sheet and ensure that workers have received site-specific training for those changes. So just to keep in mind that you don't have to be updating your sheets every 3 years unless that significant change has occurred. And just to emphasize the importance of safety data sheets, I found an example from WorkSafe, British Columbia, where a worker in a mechanic shop was using brake cleaner that contained tetrachloroethylene solvent and in the area where welding was being done. And the vapors from this brake cleaner reacted with the heat from welding and created phosgene gas. And phosgene gas, it can make you sick or it can kill you depending on the concentration of it. So the safety data sheet warns about using this product near heat sources. So if this worker may not have had access to a safety data sheet, may not have received site-specific training from his employer on the safety data sheet and the use of tetrachloroethylene around heat sources. So there's a lot of information that is used in those safety data sheets that are communicated. And as mentioned, with safety data sheets, they are broken into 16 sections. I have the first 8 itemized on this slide, and I won't go through all of these safety data sheet components today. What I encourage you to do is use your safety data sheets for the hazardous products in your workplace when you deliver site-specific training. So when you go over with workers at your facility, this is the product, this is the first aid measures that we need to be aware of, handling and storage, exposure controls, so that people understand the concerns or hazards and risks potentially that are involved with certain hazardous products. And I just put on the screen the other 8 components of a safety data sheet. So again, making sure this information is readily available for the hazardous products in your workplace and that people have received site-specific training for those hazardous products pertinent to these safety data sheets. Section 7, education and training. And again, these next couple slides are quite important because there's a lot of misconception about WHMIS education, WHMIS training, does it expire, what do I need to do? And essentially, I'm going to start by separating the two. Education means the delivery of general information to workers. Training means the delivery of work site and job-specific information to workers. So the difference is, if I were to take a $10 online WHMIS course or participate in today's webinar, I'm receiving education only on WHMIS. If I were to take site-specific training and review hazardous products in my workplace, that would be considered as training. And WHMIS 2015 calls for both. Workers need to be educated and trained on hazardous products they work with or around. So workers need to know about these hazards. They need to know about the safe handling procedures, PPE, and disposal. That's all part of their site-specific training. If taking an educational course, such as the $10 course or this webinar, does not make you compliant in meeting the requirements for WHMIS 2015. This is part of the process. You still need to receive site-specific training. And employers must continue to educate and train workers on the use of hazardous products. Competency cannot be defined by a certificate. A certificate only demonstrates that the individual has completed an educational program. It can be an indication of competency, but it does not necessarily define or demonstrate competency. For example, a worker may have a certificate to demonstrate they have completed a course on WHMIS. This does not necessarily demonstrate the worker's capability of safely dealing with chemicals in the workplace. A better assessment of the worker's skill in chemical handling could be a workplace assessment where the worker explains or demonstrates the process needed for safe hazardous material handling in the workplace. And WHMIS 2015 indicates that employers are responsible to ensure that both generic WHMIS education and site-specific WHMIS training is delivered to workers. And that's something I need to really emphasize. When you take a WHMIS course, people ask, does this expire? Well, in all honesty, the WHMIS course that you have taken only gives you part of what you need. The educational course, whether it be online or a webinar, is education only. But the WHMIS requirements ensure that the employer indicates that the workers receive education as well as training. So some examples of how training could look is around the hazardous products in your workplace. You may utilize a safety data sheet and go through the information specific to that chemical so people are aware of how to handle that chemical and what the requirements are for safe usage. And be sure to document that process because that is site-specific training. And actually for years we have been auditing for both generic WHMIS as well as site-specific training for workers. So I need to really emphasize that because we do get some questions and sometimes people are a bit unclear of what the WHMIS regulations are calling for. So in addition to that, the employer needs to review their WHMIS system annually for changes in chemicals and ensure training is provided to those affected. So an annual evaluation, you can either do a test or a practical observation of people working with specific hazardous products. And employers can have the workers, like I said, either complete a test or observe them working with the hazardous products to ensure that they are competent in doing so. And this will ensure that annual review is taking place, and be sure that you document that process as well when you are delivering that site-specific training as well as the annual review of the WHMIS system at your facility. The education and training may be provided by an employer, a qualified person or agency. The Motor Safety Association, we can help you with your site-specific training and get you started in that process if you're not already doing that. And the WHMIS legislation places the obligation on employer to ensure the education and training is provided. And as I indicated, today's webinar or an online course will just give you the education component, but you still need that site-specific training. And just keep in mind, you do have a choice when it does come to WHMIS 2015 and taking different systems. There are a lot of companies that may be phoning you with high-pressure tactics to take their course as well as that information. But again, what's required is education and training. So by taking a course or a webinar gives you part of the information, but you still need that site-specific in-house training to ensure workers are understanding of utilizing those hazardous products in their facility. Further to that, during this transition period, workers need to be educated and trained on both WHMIS 1988 and WHMIS 2015. And this is necessary as long as you have basically the old type of workplace labels with the hatched border and MSDS sheets at your facility. An example would be at our office we have a fire extinguisher, and when I looked at it, it has the hatched border on it, and therefore that falls under WHMIS 1988. So I still need to be trained on WHMIS 1988, and have to be aware of that system until we are fully transitioned into WHMIS 2015 and the new workplace labels and safety data sheets are fully in place. And a good idea too is to review your material safety data sheet library, and you can update these to the safety data sheets proactively. So you can go through your system and ensure that where you have a material safety data sheet, you obtain the new safety data sheet for that product, and that you use those for the site-specific training delivered at your facility to give workers the understanding of how to work with that hazardous product. And it's also imperative that employers have a WHMIS plan to ensure that the education and site-specific training is complete and safety data sheets are in place. For all the attendees of today's webinar, I do have an education and training plan sample I will provide. And as I mentioned before, MSA can come out to your facility and work with you to help you set up your site-specific training plan and do a few examples of site-specific training with you as you get your WHMIS system started or fully transitioned into the 2015 process. Some good examples of WHMIS education courses are on the WorkSafe Saskatchewan website. We also have the link on our website. You can take the WHMIS 2015 for Saskatchewan workers, and that will give you the education component of the new WHMIS system. But by taking this course, it doesn't put you in full compliance. You still need to have the site-specific training in-house for the hazardous products that your staff work with. And if you have not taken the WHMIS 1988 course, that is also available on this website at $10 each. And again, both of these courses will just give you the education component, but they still need to both be followed up with site-specific training for the hazardous products at your facility. So I know I went through a lot of information today around WHMIS, and as I said before, there's going to be some samples going out with a WHMIS 2015 implementation plan, education and training checklists, and I do have some other WHMIS 2015 resources which will be sent out to all attendees of today's webinar. You'll also receive an educational certificate template that you received education on WHMIS 2015 awareness, as well as there will be a short survey after today's webinar to give us feedback of what you liked or didn't like and welcoming future topics. This important topic was suggested by one of you, and it was very imperative that this information be communicated as we are in the transition period to the new WHMIS system. If you liked what you heard on today's webinar, this slide and the next slide are just samples of past webinars we've completed. We've done 20 of these educational webinars in the past, actually more than 20. They are all on our website, and I encourage you to review any of those if you're looking for more educational information on any of these topics. So again, those 20 webinars are up on our website, and feel free to utilize any of those. They're all less than an hour, and they make great lunch and learn sessions. With that, this gets us to the conclusion of today's webinar on the WHMIS 2015 Global Harmonization System Awareness. At this time, I'm going to leave the webinar open to allow you some extra time. You may be wanting to enter some questions, or if you have some questions you may want to add. So I'm going to leave it open for a couple extra minutes and allow you to enter those questions if you have not done so already, if you do have questions. As well as I'm leaving our phone number and email address up on the slide for some time if you do have any further questions around today's topic. So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the interest and participating in today's webinar on WHMIS 2015 Global Harmonization System Awareness.